Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that you have decided to join us this evening. We are going to be talking about field trips. I know we haven't had very many field trip opportunities this year due to COVID, obviously, but hopefully next year we will be able to plan some really cool field trips for our students. Am I right? So we are going to talk about field trips, how to plan them effectively, how to set goals of what you guys want to get out of your field trips. But first, I want to tell you just a little bit about me and the Reach and Teach program. So my name is April Clark. I'm the executive director and co-founder of a nonprofit educational program called Reach and Teach. Every single month, we provide free professional development to teachers just like you, but also all across the United States. We have tons of free resources, lots of learning opportunities and real world experience for students that you guys can get involved with. So I'm glad you're here for the professional development. I do want to let you know I have dropped a workshop guide into the chat that you can use as we go throughout the workshop tonight. I will also email that to you guys if you can't access it in the chat, but you will have that available so that you can start making your plan of what you want to accomplish with the workshop or with the field trips that you guys plan for your students and for your classroom. So I'm going to share my screen and we will go ahead and get started. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll also do a Q&A at the end, so you can unmute yourself and ask all the questions that you want. So we will go ahead and get started now. Okay, so the first question for you guys that I want you to think about is your goals. What are you wanting to accomplish with the field trips that you host for your students? Before you plan anything and, you want it to be effective, right? So you've got to make sure that you set goals. What do those goals pertain to? So with field trips, it might be a number of different things. Maybe you want to expose students to different career paths. Maybe you want to expose them to different skills and opportunities. Maybe you want to expose them to different people in your community or different businesses. So you've got to think about, what are your goals? Maybe you want your students to learn technical skills or soft skills, employability skills. Maybe you want them to gain some type of content knowledge or reinforce content knowledge that you've been teaching in your classroom. Maybe you're just interested in increasing the interest of your students. So let's say, for example, you teach geometry and you have over 60% of the class is not interested in math or geometry. So maybe you want to plan a field trip to relate geometry to the real world and just increase the interest in whatever subject or content that you are teaching to students. So you've really got to think about that. Plan that out before you do any type of field trip planning. And we all know that planning field trips can be quite a task. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of paperwork and red tape and finding the right date and transportation and substitute teachers. There's just so much involved with field trips, but your very first step needs to be setting a goal. And I do want you to think about too, every single field trip that you have might have a different goal. So whatever your goal is definitely going to impact what activities, what locations, what people your students interact with. Those goals are going to be the foundation of every single planning decision for your field trip. So start there. Number one. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 things that make an effective field trip. Something where students are actually going to be educated with the field trips. You know, we've all been in that situation, and I'm a former classroom teacher, so I know we've all had those field trips that are really just a fun activity. We might go to a theme park or, you know, to the mall, or, you know, we can tie something into it educational. But are students really learning anything? Is it really an effective way to educate students? So what I want you guys to do is really kind of think about these 3 pillars that we're going to talk about and how you can incorporate that into your next field trip. Okay, so here's the 3 pillars. First of all, target a targeted group. Okay, so we're going to talk about how you can create a targeted group of students that will be perfect for whatever field trip you are planning. The second thing is meaningful connection. Whatever it is that you're doing with your field trip, and I'm going to let you in on a little secret. A field trip doesn't necessarily have to be off campus. When I was teaching in the classroom, I did lots of activities that I considered a field trip, but we were actually on campus, and we'll talk more about that later too. But it revolves around a meaningful connection. What does that mean? And then lastly, and probably the most important, is an immersive experience. Students are immersed in whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, whether it be skills, whether it be exposure to careers, whatever that might be. Students have to be immersed and engaged with whatever it is that you guys are doing. Okay, so first, let's start with a targeted group. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I can tell you from experience, if you take 150 students on a field trip, there's not going to be much education that is happening on that field trip, right? It's just too many students to find one activity or one location that's really going to appeal to all 150 students, or that's really going to engage with all 150 students. Or all 150 students are going to get with their friend group. They're not going to be paying attention to what's happening. They're just there to hang out and get out of school, right? Okay, so we've got to think about how we can reduce the size of your group that goes on a field trip. Now, I understand that might be kind of difficult because many times when we take a field trip, we take the majority of our students, and, you know, we don't have to worry about getting a sub because all of our students are with us. So it might be a little bit difficult to take smaller groups. Maybe you have multiple field trips for smaller groups instead of just one big field trip for one big group, right? So, you know, you might take these 10, 15 students on a field trip, and then these 10 or 15 students on a different field trip. So you've got to think about what's going to make the most sense for your classroom, for the size of your school, for the size of your classroom, and the number of students that you have. So you've got to think about a smaller group, because anytime, you guys know this, anytime you have small group learning, students are going to be able to learn more effectively. Now, how do you divide students into smaller groups, right? How do you pick? These students go here, these students go, that's kind of difficult, right? But a great way to do that is through interest surveys, aptitude test, maybe some type of special skills or abilities test. So one of the things that I always did when I was a classroom teacher, the very first week of school, I would have my students complete different personality tests or different interest surveys, not just for them, but also for me, so that I could get to know them. And so, you know, a few of the surveys that I love, or assessments that I love, if you've ever used U-Science is an awesome aptitude assessment. I don't think it's free. Our school actually had a license, so it was free, but definitely check into it. You could probably get a trial or something and allow your students to take it. But U-Science is an aptitude test. So it breaks it down, logical thinking, math skills, all of those different aptitudes, and it'll help you kind of break down what groups of students might be perfect for which field trips. And then, of course, the Myers-Briggs personality test, that one's super popular. But even just interest surveys, what are your students interested in? That's going to help you figure out who is the right group of students to take for the right field trip. So that's really important, a targeted group. So we're going to talk about 3 different aptitudes. Now, there's multiple ways for you to divide your students into different groups. But this is one of the ways that I divided my students into different groups, because what happened is, a lot of times students have multiple aptitudes that they're really good at, right? They might be really good in several different aptitudes. But what I've seen is that these 3 aptitudes really are a good dividing line for students. And so first, we'll talk about STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, and then we'll talk about the artistic creative aptitude. So maybe students are really good with problem solving or colors or graphic design or drawing or photography. That would fall into that category. And then physical, those students that like to move, they like to play sports, they're in shape, they're really interested in doing something as opposed to analyzing or sitting still or anything that doesn't involve movement. So we're going to talk about these 3 aptitudes, and I'm going to give you guys some suggestions, some ideas for field trips based on these 3 aptitudes. So the first one that we're going to talk about is STEM. Now, you are probably thinking field trips, we have to travel an hour or 2 hours from our school to have a really great field trip. That's not true at all. I taught in a very rural area. It's a really kind of small town in Alabama is where I taught. And there were so many different industries in that area that it doesn't have to be a huge, massive field trip. It just has to be an effective field trip, right? So with STEM, you might visit a local manufacturing facility. I have to tell you, this is probably one of the best field trips that I ever took my students on, is we visited a local manufacturing facility that made headlights for cars, for vehicles. And most of my students, you can imagine, I was like, I'm not ever going to work there. I'm not ever going to, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to do this and this. And by the time we left that manufacturing facility, the students were completely blown away about what they had to offer. And that manufacturing facility was literally in the backyard of our school. And the students had never even considered pursuing a career at that facility. So a lot of times our students have these preconceived notions as to what certain industries are, but it's our job as teachers to prepare them for life after high school, right? And students can't be what they don't know. So it's our job as teachers to expose them to opportunities, to careers, to different things that they've never been exposed to before, or maybe have never considered before. So think about your community. Do you have a manufacturing facility that has mechanics or engineers or, maintenance technicians that students can go to these facilities and see what the operations are like? And every single industry has marketing, accounting, human resources. So all of that is built in as well. And we'll talk more about how that works with field trips a little bit later. So maybe you're going to visit your local pharmacy. Think about chemistry, biology, all of these things with a forensic lab. That's built into these STEM careers as well too. And so a lot of times students don't think about that when they think about STEM. They just think about engineering because that's so heavily talked about in schools is the engineering component, but maybe you have a forensics lab that's close by. Maybe you have a pharmacy. I'm sure you have a pharmacy, but arranging some type of field trip to where you can go and visit these places, talk to the representatives, the individuals, the employees, and maybe even get hands-on training at these facilities as well too. Maybe a city planning department. If you think about any city or any town, they have a planning department that plans out roads and drainage and electricity grids and housing developments and shopping centers. All of that is part of STEM careers as well too. And for a student to have their eyes open to, these are careers that are right here available in my hometown, that's going to be very exciting for them to see firsthand. Because what I've found in working with young people is so many times they only know what's right in front of them. Their mom or dad or aunt and uncle, brother, sister have a career. And oftentimes they kind of just follow in the footsteps of someone that's in their family. But that's not always the best decision for students, right? We see it time and time again where a student will graduate high school and go to college to be a nurse because, their mom's a nurse and it's not the right career path for them. So if we can expose students to things outside their circle so that they can really get a feel for what they like and even what they don't like early on, that's going to be really key. If you're lucky enough to have a space center close by, actually where I live, a space center is only about an hour away. So, visiting that space center was always a big treat. It was something that was close by and within reach. But obviously that's a huge STEM career field as well too. So here's a few ideas for STEM aptitudes. If you have students that are really good in science, technology, engineering, maybe they like taking things apart, putting them back together, breaking students into those groups and taking a smaller group to these type places is definitely going to be way more effective than taking 150 students to the local manufacturing facility. Okay, so now let's talk about artistic aptitude or creative students. A lot of times we think off the top of our head, graphic design, right? Photography, videography. Yes, absolutely. If you have a studio close to you that you can take students to see that 100%, that is a great way to go. But what about a local architect office? If you have students that are really great at drawing, that they enjoy drawing, showing them careers to where they can either draw by hand or use computer software to develop blueprints. I mean, that's a really exciting career path for someone who is creative. So taking them to a local architect office. What about a bakery? You don't think about decorating cakes or cupcakes as being something that has to do with painting or drawing, but it is 100% a creative career where students can use their imagination. And it may be something they've never thought about before. Maybe a makeup salon, a hair and makeup salon where they can talk to makeup artist or hairstylist about their creative career path and what's involved there. Of course, an animation studio. How cool is that if you have that close to you in your community? And then, of course, every single business, every single corporation has a marketing department. Marketing is so heavily involved with graphic design. So if you have students that love creating graphics on the computer or designing flyers or posters, taking them to any business in your community that has a marketing department so they can see firsthand how graphic design and marketing work closely together is super important as well too. Okay, so let's talk about the last aptitude, and that is physical. Maybe you have students that love to play sports or they're really super active. Obviously they're not going to be the students that want to sit in an office and work behind a desk all day. So what type of careers might that be? Taking a field trip to a military base. I'm sure that you guys have recruiters come to your school. Most schools have recruiters of the military that come to their school and talk to students, and that's all great and awesome and everything. But taking the students to an actual location where there is a military presence, where they can see what activities happen day in and day out, what that looks like. Maybe even if you have a military reserve base that's close to you, that would be a great field trip for students to see what it actually looks like to be in the military. Instead of just someone in a nice fancy suit coming to recruit you at your school. So it's always good to see firsthand what the real world actually looks like. Maybe an EMT visiting an ambulance service. A lot of times ambulance services are completely separate from the hospital. Maybe yours is together, but figuring out a location to where students can see firsthand, maybe a fire department, where students are having that physical activity and seeing firsthand what that looks like. A distribution center. Oh my goodness. If you have an Amazon distribution center close to you, I am so jealous. I've always wanted to visit one because I've heard it is incredible. The logistics that go in behind a distribution center is just completely amazing. And I'm sure students would be blown away as well. That's a very physical job. That includes driving a forklift, carrying heavy objects, moving things from one location to another, loading trucks, unloading trucks. Is that job for everyone? Absolutely not. But there are people out there that would absolutely love doing that type of manual, hard physical labor. So figuring out, I guarantee every single community that has an industrial park probably has a distribution center of some type. Maybe not as big as Target or Walmart, but definitely on a smaller scale. And, something you have to think about too with the manufacturing facility, with distribution centers, there may be age limits on who can, visit those facilities. So it might be 16 and up. So you may only be able to take your older students to those type of facilities. So that's definitely something to check on. I bet you've probably never thought of a spa being physical labor, but a massage therapist is definitely physical work. Standing on your feet for hours at a time, using your hands. You have to be very strong to be a massage therapist. So taking students to a spa to see what that line of work looks like. Now, again, is that going to be for everyone? No, but it's your job as a teacher to figure out what opportunities, what field trips are going to be best for which students. And then, of course, a construction site. Again, this might be something that has an age limit. Your students might have to wear hard hats or some type of safety gear, which is also super cool too. But I guarantee any of these places that I have named off, whether it be STEM, the creative career paths, these physical careers, every single place that I've named off, if you call them and ask them and let them know what you're wanting to accomplish, your goal, I guarantee you will have the opportunity to visit those places. People in the industry professionals are so excited to help teachers. They're so excited to get involved with students because guess what? Those students are potential future employees. They are always looking for future employees. So they're definitely going to want to host you at their site, tell the students, tell you more about their industry. They will be so excited that you called and asked and invited them to be part of your students' education. So first step is set a goal, right? What do you want to accomplish? Second step, think about how you're going to divide your students, how you're going to reduce the size of your group. So it's a very specific, small, targeted group of students that are right for a very specific field trip. Okay. So that's 2. Number 3 is you just got to ask, right? Don't be afraid to ask. We as humans are so afraid of rejection, but I want you to think about this. It's just a no. If they say no, you're in the same position that you were in before you asked. So you have nothing to lose. And you might make a really cool connection in the professional world. So I definitely encourage you to step out of your comfort zone. Even teachers have to step out of their comfort zone sometimes. We always push students to do that, but even teachers have to do that. And just ask. Okay, so we've talked about different ideas for field trips, different locations that you could visit. Now let's talk about what do you do when you go there? So you go, let's say we're going to the distribution center. Now what? What do we do? Well, we want to make sure that there's meaningful connections for students. So you might host a roundtable discussion with multiple representatives from the industry. You might have multiple representatives or employees talk to your students in more of like a classroom or group setting, right? So I want to take a second to talk about roundtables. You know how I mentioned earlier that I used to do field trips and I never even left the school campus? This is roundtables. This was my absolute favorite activity to do with students on campus. I would set up tables, whether it be in my classroom, the library, the lunchroom, whatever it would be, that seat about 4 students and an industry professional. And so in this picture, you can see that this is someone from the military, and this just happens to be a picture from a Veterans Day roundtable discussion that we did. So students were able to sit at tables with a military representative from each branch of the military. So we had a table for Marines, a table for the Navy, a table for the Coast Guard, and students would sit 4 to a table with 1 industry representative. And the industry representative would tell a little bit about their career, only about 5 or 6 minutes, and then open it up to questions from the students. So this did 2 things. 1, students were in a small group, so they felt more comfortable asking questions. 2, they were sitting down and it was more casual. They were all on the same level. Instead of just having a guest speaker come talk to your class where they stand in front of the room, that can be quite intimidating, especially if it's a large group of students. Some of your shyer students may never ask questions. But hosting a roundtable discussion like this makes students more comfortable to ask questions and actually engage with the industry professional. So the industry professional would tell about their career for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then the remaining 12 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes, students could ask questions, and then I would ring a bell and the students would swap tables. So the industry professional would always stay at the same table, but the students would rotate from one table to another, and they would stay with the same group that they were with to begin with. So by the end of this activity, every single student got to talk and learn from every single industry professional. Now, obviously, you could do this with a really large number of industry professionals, but every student may not get to talk to every professional. So typically I would try to keep it to around 4 tables, maybe 5 tables, depending on how much time that we had. But it was a great way to expose students to different careers. You might bring in someone from Walmart or a group of industry professionals from Walmart. You might have the general manager, you might have the distribution manager, you might have a cashier. And so those 3 professionals would talk to the students and expose them to different departments or different levels of that business. So this concept can be implemented in a ton of different ways, depending on what you're trying to expose students to or what concepts that you're trying to teach. So what happens when you go to the location that you're taking a field trip to? You might have a round table. And it's going to be up to you as a teacher to really work with the contact at that facility to plan out what that field trip looks like. Because I guarantee if you call up the Amazon distribution center and you say, hey, can I bring a field trip of students to come see you? They're going to say, sure. But they're just going to get to tour the facility and maybe talk to someone and then leave. But it's up to you as a teacher to talk with that contact and say, hey, I would really love for my students to talk to an employee in the marketing department, an employee in the sales department or the accounting department, and really having several touch points, several contacts for students to talk to in that facility so that they can see all the different career opportunities and career paths available. So I want to point something out, and I should have mentioned this earlier. If you've never been to the Tennessee Titans Learning Lab, and I'm pretty sure that every professional team probably does something similar to this. So obviously, if you're not close to Tennessee, this might be a hard sell to get to go to a field trip. But they do a wonderful job of creating a super effective field trip for your students, because students not only get to tour the facility, but they get to talk to someone in ticket sales. They get to talk to someone in social media management. They get to talk to someone that's the greenskeeper that takes care of the field. So there's so many different departments that students get to talk to and answer and ask questions of, and really get to see firsthand what those careers are like. So my first year teaching, we took a group of students to this learning lab, and I thought it was awesome. But I came back to my classroom and thought, how could we replicate that in our community? Well, that's easy, right? It's exactly what we've been talking about, is figuring out how your students can have several different touch points at whatever field trip whatever field trip location that you guys decide to go on. So I kind of jumped ahead of myself earlier. I wanted to show you guys this diagram for what round tables look like. So obviously it doesn't have to be an actual round table, but again, you would have tables set up with students around them. You might have a representative from the marketing department, you might have a representative from finance, and then one from human resources. And so students would get to talk to each one of those people in the industry. So hopefully that kind of gives you a visual of what I had discussed with you guys earlier. So meaningful connections. It's all about meaningful connections, because what one student might find interesting at the fire department, another student might not. So having several touch points to appeal to different students is extremely important in creating an effective field trip. Okay, so let's talk about this last element, an immersive experience. So what does that mean? How can students engage? So we've already talked about choosing a location to visit. We've already talked about how to connect, those meaningful connections. But we don't just want our students to just talk to someone or just ask questions. That's great, but we want to take it a step further. So what is some type of activity? What is something that students can do while they're at the location that's really going to immerse them into what working in that community or in that corporation or that business is like? So maybe that includes simple soft skills, right? Students need soft skills. You guys might call them employability skills or essential life skills. It's all the same thing. Making eye contact, shaking hands, all of those super basic skills that any person, any student needs to succeed in life. So maybe you have your location representatives go over some soft skills, practice some soft skills. It may sound silly, but having students practice soft skills with someone outside of your classroom is so much more effective than you trying to have students, right? You trying to have students practice those soft skills. We've all seen it. We as teachers can say something over and over and over, but as soon as a guest speaker comes in and says it, the students are like, Oh, I get it now. Same thing with soft skills training. Maybe there's some type of hands-on activity where students can practice some type of job that whatever, if they go to a fire department, maybe they can practice rolling the hoses up or something really basic. Entry-level skills training. So I told you about that manufacturing facility that we visited that made the headlights for the cars. One thing that I did not realize is that most industries, most facilities have their own onboarding training process, right? So this facility had an entire wing of the building that was 100% dedicated to training their employees. Now, I may be silly not knowing that, but someone that went from accounting to teaching, I'd never really encountered a training facility before. So I thought it was so cool that there's people dedicated to training employees for the first 2 to 3 weeks of a job, right? So they would go in and they had these different stations set up with different elements of whatever equipment that the employees were going to be working on. And they would go through each station and they would do the skill, they would do the process, whatever activity it was that they would actually be doing out on the manufacturing floor. So I thought that was incredible. So maybe having your students go through whatever simple, basic entry-level training that they would normally do with new employees. Now, obviously, they couldn't go through the whole process, but some type of shortened training. I think facility representatives would be so excited about that, right? Because anytime they can teach students, potential future employees about the onboarding process, about the skills training, I really feel like most people would get excited about that. So let's talk a little bit about the simple soft skills, right? They may be simple, but they are definitely important. Shaking hands. There is nothing that I hate worse than shaking hands with someone and it being a weak, disappointing handshake, right? I want a firm handshake. That shows confidence. That shows that you are there and you're excited to be there and you're excited to meet that person. So having your students simply practice shaking hands with maybe the human resources manager or someone at the location that you're visiting. Interview skills. Maybe have your students go through a mock interview as if they were interviewing to work at that facility, at that location. Maybe at the pharmacy, if they're trying to get a pharmacy technician job, have your students go through a shortened interview process. What questions are they asked? Anytime that students can get that real world experience of going through an actual interview, it's going to help them in their future. Maybe work attire. If you visit a bakery, is it possible to have your students wear the uniform that the employees are wearing at the bakery? Or if they visit a construction site, they can wear the hard hats and maybe the yellow safety vest. Maybe if you're going to a fire department, are students able to try on the gear to see how that works, to see if they would enjoy, wearing that uniform on a daily basis? So simple tasks that are also super engaging, that keeps the students interested. Don't be afraid to ask if your students can participate in those when they visit whatever location you ultimately end up deciding for them to go to. Now let's talk about the entry level basic skills. Okay, so obviously this is going to be different per industry. As I mentioned before, some places have in-house training. If you visit a bakery, maybe you can have the baker teach your students simple cake decorating techniques or, cookie baking techniques. If you visit a distribution warehouse, they're definitely going to want their employees to know about the first in, first out. You've got to use the first products that were delivered before you use the last products that were delivered. Maybe if you go to an architect's office, they could teach students about calculating the pitch of a roof. That's geometry, right? Think about ways that you can tie in whatever content that you're teaching to the real world. So if you're a geometry teacher, that would be an awesome place to visit, to help students learn about the calculations of, the pitch of a roof. Maybe learn how to measure fluids properly. If you go to a pharmacy or you go to a forensics lab, maybe having them teach students how to properly measure certain liquids or other, components of their job. So really kind of talking to that location contact, whoever you're working with to build this field trip, and asking them, what are some very basic skills that you can teach that my students can practice while they're at your facility? Simply ask. That is so key. I know I've said that so many times, but just ask. And that's going to definitely help you to plan an effective field trip. So just to recap, number one, you guys have got to set goals. What do you want your students to learn? What do you as a teacher want to accomplish or achieve? Number two, figure out how to choose the right group for the right field trip. Again, I know that can be difficult, but maybe you partner with another teacher at the school and you guys rotate chaperoning, whatever field trips. Maybe you plan together certain field trips that students from each class can attend, and, y'all can rotate substituting each other's class. There's definitely ways for you to work around the troubles that you think you might face. And I can guarantee you will see a huge difference in impact if you can take a smaller, more targeted group of students than just taking all 100 students that you teach. So definitely think about that when you're planning. The next thing is making meaningful connections. Who can students connect with? When students leave, you want to make sure that they're able to keep that connection, whether it be through contact information, writing a thank you note as a follow-up, or emailing as a follow-up. So students can keep that connection, because you never know, a student might need a job in the future at that business or at that facility. So making sure those are meaningful connections that they're able to continue to build that relationship. And then lastly, you want to make sure students have a super engaging, immersive experience. They're not just there to listen to a bunch of adults say a lot of boring things. They're there to actually do and be involved in whatever world that you're trying to expose them to. So I hope that you guys have maybe taken away a few tips or tricks that you hadn't thought about before. Maybe I sparked an idea of different activities or field trips that you can do in the upcoming school year. I know this year has been rough for all of our teachers, and I know you're excited to be able to get outside of the classroom again and make site visits and do different things that you haven't been able to do before. So I want you guys to know, every single month we do professional development. It's 100% free. All of you that attended tonight will get a certificate of completion. I will email that to you. It's good for 1 hour of professional development. I will also send you guys the workshop guide so that you can start planning your next field trip. This is my contact information, so you can email me, reach out to us on social media or through our website. We definitely love helping students and teachers any way that we can. So I'm going to hang out for a little while. If you guys have questions, you can unmute yourself or you can drop those into the chat. But if you don't have any questions, definitely feel free to jump off, and you guys have a great night.